Well, great day, grace and peace be unto you from God, our Father, and the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Dr. C.J. Rhodes, and I am the pastor of Mount Helm Baptist Church here in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm also the director of the Hiram Rhodes Revels Institute for Ethical Leadership at the Alcorn State University. And it's my pleasure to be a part of and to lead this religious affairs segment of the Mississippi Conference of the NAACP's annual conference convention and policy institute, the 76th annual at that. And many thanks to all of those who are doing great work in the form of leadership and service. And thank you for asking me to participate in this conversation. Today, I thought it wise to lead in an interview style, conversation style segment with Reginald Buckley, who is at present the president of the General Missionary Baptist State Convention of the state of Mississippi, the newly elected and soon to be installed president of the state convention. He's also the proud pastor of the Cade Chapel Missionary Baptist Church in Jackson, Mississippi as well. He is a person with a great heart for the church and for its impact on society. And so we're so glad to have with us President Buckley. So President Buckley, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rhodes. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share with you in this format, and certainly to the State Conference of the NAACP, Reverend James, President, and certainly the Executive Director, Dr. Corey Wiggins. We thank God for their leadership and for all that they do to advance the work of justice in the state of Mississippi. I'm certainly looking forward to this conversation with you.
Certainly, absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure. First of all, I'm sure many people in the state conference know by now, but for those who don't know, you were elected in July at the annual session to be the president of the General Missionary Baptist State Convention. Could you talk a little bit about the convention itself, the impact it has on churches, but the broader state of Mississippi as well, and just what your belief is about your role at this time? How do you feel about being the president of the state convention?
Wow. Well, I guess if I could take the last part of your question first, it's somewhat overwhelming. It's an overwhelming feeling to know that that I've been entrusted with providing leadership with such an historic institution as the General Missionary Baptist State Convention that has so much history in our state, having been at the genesis of so many of our institutions, whether it be Jackson State, Natchez College, but also having such dynamic impact with even the politics of our state. Some of our former presidents were statesmen in terms of being a part of the House of Representatives or the Senate. And so the footprint of General Missionary Baptist is large, is grand, and to be a part of that great tradition and that legacy is an honor that I really hold dear. Something that I didn't know would ever be a part of my reality, but I'm thankful that the Lord has seen fit to allow it to be so. As I said, the convention itself is a collection of churches throughout the state of Mississippi, and we believe that we do together that which no single church can do by itself. In terms of evangelistic and discipleship impact, but also in terms of advancing social agendas that impact people on everyday issues, whether that be education, whether that be fair housing. We believe that that's also a part of the mission and has been a part of the fabric of the mission for General Missionary Baptist State Convention.
Wow. So we are very, very excited to have you at the helm of this great historic and storied institution and organization. We'll talk more about the significance of your role, particularly given the fact that you are, according to my estimate, the youngest of the presidents, or at least the youngest in a very, very long time. But you brought up two things about the convention itself and its origins: institution building and the role that pastors played in public policy, right? So you think about the foundations, particularly of Jackson State University. There would be no Jackson State University today without the role of the state convention. And I think sometimes people either forget that or didn't know that. And so that's one bucket. The second one was the role of public leadership from the pulpit to, say, the state legislature or various other vehicles for public policy leadership. Today, there are those who debate about whether or not the Black church should be involved in things outside the four walls of the church. And our subject in a broader sense today is about the Black church, its perils and promises going forward. Do you believe that this convention and that churches in general, conventions, denominations in general, have a present day role both in institution building and support as well as public policy leadership?
Absolutely. I believe that the church, when the church is at its best, that it serves people's souls, but it also serves the societies in which those souls live.
Yeah.
We can't divorce public policy from good theology. I think good
Mhm.
theology impacts and informs public policy because Jesus speaks himself of himself when he takes the scroll and says, I've come. This is the reason why I've come, to preach the good news unto the poor, to set the captives free. All of that, it touches everyday life, and
Mhm.
so I think a church that sticks its head in the sand of everyday issues and only comes out on Sunday mornings is a church that does not recognize the fullness of what the gospel really leads us to do and to be in this present age. We've got to touch people where they are, how they live,
Yeah.
and that's much more than one's soul salvation.
Yeah. Let's dial back a little bit. We talked about your role in the convention. Let's talk about Cade Chapel, both your dad's tenure, Horace Buckley, who, of course, preceded you for what, 45 years?
45 years, right? That's right.
Yeah, 45 years. Both his work at Cade and in the state legislature, and then your tenure now, both as you were executive pastor for a season and now senior pastor. Highlight some of the things that Cade Chapel has done over, say, the last 50 or so years, both within and beyond the four walls of the church, and kind of itemize, name the impact. Because again, as we talked about JSU, there are people who don't know that sort of origin story. There's some institutions and organizations in Jackson and the Jackson Metro that people don't know have their origins in Cade Chapel.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think there, over the course of the years, one of the things that my dad really leaned into was um, community and institutional development,
Hmm.
seeing the spaces where where the church needed to have a presence, where 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 faithful people needed to have their fingerprint seen. And so there were many opportunities that he sought out, but also opportunities that were brought to him
Yeah.
that he and the board thought well to involve the church. One of those, of course, being Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health. with Dr. Shirley and Dr. Anderson and many of those who were at the helm of the creation of that institution were in need of a space to be located. It was actually housed here at Cade Chapel. Sunday school rooms were transformed into examination rooms during the week. And so while we were teaching Bible lessons on Sunday, we were giving blood pressures on Monday and vaccinations throughout the week. And that work started right here in the church. It's things like that. We've had a Head Start Center here at the church. Most recently, our church has been involved in the building of the community through the Cade Courtyard Senior Apartments, 81 units of apartments for senior citizens. It's the first of a development for this area of this kind in over 80 years, is what I'm told. And so we were very excited to be able to bring that type of again needed institution, needed facility to our community, and that's kind of the I guess you could say it's the heritage that we've inherited. When I look back at not only my dad of 45 years, but in fact the person for whom this church was named, Cade, who was a former slave from Carroll County, Mississippi, who came to this area shortly after the Civil War, bought up property in what is now known as Fondren, and parceled out that property, saving a parcel for the establishment of a church. And then the other pieces of property being sold to other business owners. It's kind of that whole social engineering. How do we develop community? How do we improve community? I think that is, from its inception, has been a part of the fabric of this church. And so I'm privileged also to now be at the helm of this institution that has that type of history and trajectory.
Wow, that's amazing. Let me circle back very quickly. What years did basically the evolution of the Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health piece come about? 80s, 90s?
I believe that would have been. I'd have to go back and get that for sure. I'm thinking it would have been the late 70s, actually.
Okay.
78, 79, but I don't quote me on that. I need to go back and see on that.
So let's for the sake of argument go with the late 1970s. That would have been, essentially 100 years after the founding of 100 years or so of the founding of what we now know as Jackson University. 1877 state convention helps to bring about what is then Natchez Seminary, and 100 or so years later, there's a local church that's engaging in what is now an institution that is not only just a blessing to Jackson, but in my hometown of Hazelhurst, and drive down through Vicksburg, you see Jackson Hines Comprehensive there. So to think about when this new idea needed shelter and incubation, it was in the context of a church building. I think about when Jackson College essentially is making its move from what is now Millsaps over to Lynch Street, it pitches a tent at Mount Helm for about a year or two.
Right.
The role of our churches in being incubators and sustainers for many of our institutions, even the NAACP, right? I mean, we can't really think about the strength of this organization without the support and leadership of many churches. For one, many times way back in the 60s and even today, NAACP meetings happening in church sanctuaries and basements.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and so many of our lifetime members of these, of NAACP are also members of churches. So it's interesting then, just that history and that heritage. When you hear people say that the Black church is dead or the Black church is not doing enough today, given that history and heritage, given some of the things we named, we know that's not descriptive of every Black church, but what would be your sense of the lay of the land? Let's say pre-pandemic, right? What's the lay of the land in terms of what Black churches, generally speaking, state convention, what were we dead? Were we on life support? What was going on?
Wow. Wouldn't say we were dead. I would say that some of our churches certainly needed some blood transfusions.
My God.
And thankfully, I think in many ways the pandemic may have been served just that purpose. It may have been the transfusion that we needed in terms of reimagining the role of the church, reimagining how we do what we do, and reimagining who and where our mission field is. Seeing the need to go beyond the four walls and seeing the need to address real issues that are right before us that millennials and others beyond the millennial are wrestling with and dealing with and demanding answers for. Because here's what I believe. I believe that there are many more who are rooting for the church and who respect the church than who are detractors of the church. But I believe that the church must lean into and give those who are rooting for it a reason to continue and a reason to believe in it. I believe there are many more people who may be even on the sidelines right now, but just a little bit of encouragement, right? Just a little bit of engagement from the church will reignite that spark that's already in them. I'll give you a good example. We were at the Two Rivers Gala recently, where we were interviewing Howard John Wesley, and one of the things that was said after that interview, a young lady who was making a presentation came up, and she was trying to make her presentation to Tougaloo, but before she could even get to that, she had to comment on the conversation that we had just had about the church. And one of the things she said was, I came to make a presentation, but clearly I was here to hear that conversation. I'm here because I needed to hear what was said, because I had lost hope, and this makes me want to go back to church.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So I think there's so many more who just need to know that the church is here. We are alive. Some of us are getting well, and as we do that, that you'll see much more meaningful engagement that really speaks to present day needs and not just our history and our heritage.
Wow. That closing piece is very strong. I do want to tease out the piece about that young lady's statement also. But before getting to that, we talked a lot about the history and heritage of the church and things that a church did and churches did years ago. And at the risk of being a little offensive, there's a generation of Black Christians who often talk about what we once were. And they still connect to and commit to the church because of what we once were. My generation of following tends to say, what have you done for us lately? So we can talk about MLK, we can talk about Fannie Hamer, we can talk about those kinds of things. Those are important. But there does seem to be a profound disconnect in many of our churches when we think about the convention, where younger people don't feel as plugged in because there's so much sort of nostalgia and not strategy for today. You're in the cusp of that. You're not a baby boomer, you're not a millennial, you're a Gen Xer. So that means you're in your mid-40s, right? And you've just inherited the leadership of this storied institution, storied organization in the General Missionary Baptist State Convention. And if we're frank, conventions, denominations around the nation are wrestling with the present and the future. Given your perch, given your perspective on what the convention has meant, but the struggles we have going forward. What's your perspective on what the convention needs to do today and going forward to make sure millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha recognize that the convention still matters, that churches still matter if they've not had as much hope as the young lady was given at the Two Rivers Gala?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you're right to place me in that gap. I think one of the things I said during the campaign season was that I'm young enough to relate to millennials, but yet old enough to be respected by boomers and
Yeah.
otherwise. And so yeah, I'm in that space. And my hope is that being in that space, I will be that bridge between the two. Here's what I believe, that uh, we do owe it to our boomers, the generations before us, who have held a standard, who have made the strides, who have made the sacrifices, who have done the blood, the sweat, and the tears to get us to where we are. We should not sneeze over that. That's real. That's real work.
That's
That's
right.
not a tweet. That's not a hashtag. That's real work that costs lives, that costs bodily harm, and we should honor that always. And we should make sure that those who are coming behind us understand that, value that, and honor that, and cherish that. We also must lean into what that younger generation is saying matters most to them. And I guess what I'm saying is, as a convention and as churches, we can't be afraid to talk to and touch the stuff that's at the core of this now generation,
Mm.
right? Whether it's and don't get me wrong, still be the church. Be clear about our convictions. Be clear about our positions, but also be courageous enough to meet people where they are, to speak to their issues directly, right?
Yeah.
To speak to the issues of identity, to speak to issues of cultural appropriation, to speak to issues of systemic and structural racism, to speak directly to the things that are on their mind and give an answer, give
Mm.
a biblical answer, and be clear on that answer. You know, I think when we do that, we at least in their minds gain a little more street credibility. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we've been missing to a far degree, because we've been so focused on getting their souls saved that we've not spoken to their souls issues,
Mm.
their
Hmm.
souls questions. And so I like to think we need to do both and not either or.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. And I think too that you talked about the credible organizing work that the previous generations did to get us here, and I think you're right to say that shouldn't be sneezed at, because there are some in my generation and younger who uh, don't really understand or respect the levels of sacrifice that many put into maintaining churches, conventions, communities, schools, to save their lives, to save their families. Um, on the flip side, as you noted in your closing, at the same time, I think we have to figure out how to not just marry the wisdom of the elders, but the strategies of the elders to the present day, right? I remember, for instance, when I was searching through the state sovereignty files, I was doing some research for something
Yeah.
several years ago, and started to see names of church members.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Like
sir. I've
living,
done that.
yeah,
Yes.
like living, like this is an usher, this is a deep, like right now,
Yes.
and they're being spied on, 60
Yes.
years ago at Tougaloo College. because they were
Yes.
organizing for NAACP to help get the right to vote, and they had to figure out ways to do this. And they were saying, this is a school teacher. We got to figure out a way to get rid. It was like that
Absolutely.
time's version of the beef about CRT today, critical race theory
Yes.
today, right? And I'm blown away because here's just this laid back usher, for instance, or this gray headed deaconess, and I'm like, you all are superheroes,
Yes.
right? Like,
Absolutely.
like y'all are. I probably have spotted y'all in some of these Eyes on the Prize films, right? And yet, making sure we tell those stories and make sure that wisdom and that those strategies and those organizing principles don't die with that generation. And so I think it's so important to make sure that you as a bridger, for instance, can make sure that that's being passed along, while also recognizing that organizing may take on, the principles may be the same, but the practices may differ, right? They didn't have social media back then. They didn't have group chats, right?
Right.
We have those today. But the principles behind what they did, I think, last even now.
Yeah. And let me be clear. When I mentioned hashtags and tweets, I didn't mean to suggest that there's not any forward movement that can come from that. That is oftentimes the social activism of today, and that shouldn't be taken lightly either. I'm simply saying that oftentimes I think that if we don't keep that, like you just said, keep that in the forefront, if we don't tell that story, I've done the same thing where I've gone and looked, and I've seen Cade Chapel's name and seen deacons and mothers and to think that this is written about them, that they were keeping files on these individuals, from things that they were buying to and well, I won't go into all of it, but the depth of intel that was being collected on our people in order to keep that movement from happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's a story that we gotta make sure that our generation and before understand as they go about their own movements, right? Recognize some of the freedoms that they have in planning and in progressing their movements, that it was a different level of
I mean, so and I'm glad you pointed that out. So we're not disparaging social media organizing, because that has in many ways moved things along in very deep ways over the last couple of years or so. But one thing you made me think about, right, is the state of Mississippi was spying on its citizens.
Yes.
That's different than I won't name any names so we won't get in trouble, but social media platforms that tell you on the front end, everything you post on here is for, we have rights to it unless you opt out, right? When they were organizing in Cade or at Tougaloo, or they weren't intending to be, they knew it was under the threat of spying, but they were not signing up on an agreement. Yes, I'm going to go here so that all my records could be displayed, because it could have very powerful consequences, both in their employment and their lives even. So I think we have to appreciate, sometimes that the cranky old deacon, for instance, is a war veteran.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And we need to and find ways to navigate through that.
Absolutely.
So COVID had a big impact on our churches, both in terms of healthcare and loss of life for many churches. It also really kind of forced all of our churches to pivot, and tragically, those that did not pivot did not fare as well through the pandemic. We're still in it. Hopefully, we're kind of near the end. Next year sometime we'll be outside of it. What do you think the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the lingering impact of the COVID pandemic, will have on the Black church in Mississippi in particular, and its ability to respond to social crises that you've mentioned?
Well, I think in terms of the church's ability and the convention's ability to be able to respond, um, the pandemic actually probably better prepared us to be able
Mm,
to respond, um, to be able to use technology in ways that churches and conventions, for that matter, were either just on the cusp of understanding or refusing to understand. This pandemic pushed us, some unwillingly, but pushed us into that space. And so I think it makes the church bilingual in a way, to be able to speak language that it just was not speaking before, to be able to communicate with demographics and populations that we were missing. So I think in that way it actually propels the church to be that much more engaging, to be that much more effective in messaging, to be that more creative in terms of how it messages.
mm, mm,
We've had to learn social media skills. We've had to learn production skills and understanding how to put things together that make for compelling content that we've never had to do before. So I think that this actually serves the church and serves the convention well, those that have leaned into that space.
wow, that's good. That I think in some ways piggybacks off of the previous conversation we were having about generations, because we do know, with all due respect to our elders, that many times the Black church and our civic organizations like the NAACP can sometimes be difficult spaces for the advancement of a pipeline of younger leadership. We kind of, young folks do their thing until they get old enough to, right?
Sure.
So, but the pandemic demonstrated you at least have to have young people
Yeah.
in key positions to, who understand technology, who understand messaging, who understand communicating to this present age. And one of the things we've seen, particularly during your tenure thus far, is an embrace of that in terms of newer models of reaching people. You can give and register online now or via an app. I mean, it is something that other folks were doing a lot longer, but it's novel for our context, and yet it's something that
Mhm.
the younger folk have been like, why I gotta like write, fill out stuff and send it down to the seminary.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, so talk about what you believe local churches, state convention will have to embrace with greater enthusiasm now into the next few next couple of years, in order to not just be vibrant and viable of street cred, but to really just say, look, y'all, like Mississippi Baptist, Mississippi, like we have no choice but to make these changes and do it yesterday.
Wow. Wow. Well, let me try and frame it by putting some Bible to it.
All right.
Jesus says, you don't put new wine into old wineskins,
Yeah. Yeah.
because the wineskins will be destroyed and the wine will be spilled. Um, uh, and then he says, rather put new wine in new wineskins. Um, the Greek translation there for new wine skins is not necessarily new like we think about, but rather refreshed, refreshed wine
Mhm.
skins. So what Jesus is not saying to throw away old wine skins, which is something that I think sometimes we're guilty of,
Yeah.
to saying
Yeah.
if it's old, throw it away, get rid of it.
Mhm.
What Jesus is saying is no, if it's old, it can still be used, but it should be refreshed if new wine is going to be put into it. And so I think it's more of some of what you've seen the church do, and some of what you've seen young people do with their mothers, showing mother how to use Zoom, how to get on, right,
Yeah.
how to how to use this technology. It's not saying, well, you just can't go to church. No, we're going to refresh this. We're going to show you how to apply it, how to be conditioned or reconditioned so that you can be served and so that we can be used. And I think that's the both and that you make space where both can be their best, not where one is chosen over the other. And as a church and as NAACP and all of our other institutions, I think that's probably the model that we have to do and look at is with all of these new things, how do we refresh what's in place, recognizing that everything can't be right. There's some things that have served their generation, served their time, served their season, and it no longer has application. But what can be refreshed, right? What can be renewed? And that is the work, honestly, that I think every institution, every church must go through. Here at Cade, we're actually in the beginning stages of doing that now, as we enter into the next year, to look at what has served its season, but then what needs to be refreshed, what has fresh applications, if we can reimagine it and retrofit it accordingly. I may not have answered your question directly, but I hope it at least gives us a way to think about some of those things. Yeah.
Well, you really raised a really great point about that passage regarding the wineskins, because we've usually preached it in terms of throw the brittle ones away and get new wineskins. And one of the terms that was very prevalent when I was at Duke Divinity School was tradition innovation. And I really gravitated toward that. It's you take what's been and you innovate it. You don't throw it away. Just you do something refreshed with it. And I do think, interestingly enough, I mean, Generation Z, which is the generation after Millennials, they have really, if you've noticed, most of what is coming out in movies and television today are actually refreshments of the things we grew up with.
Yeah.
So from Gen X also, reprisals of ABC television sitcoms that were on in the 80s and 90s. And now my twin boys who are 7 are falling in love with Star Wars and various Disney movies that we watched growing up, all this kind of stuff. And it's all kind of making this comeback. And even older, like in college, they're dressing in these preppy ways. They're doing the blue jeans with the bow tie. I mean, stuff that was in vogue 30, 40 years ago. And then we went through this weird period in the 90s where we said, let's throw all of it away. And now it's making a comeback. And I do think that's a good word of hope for our churches and conventions and the NAACP, that I think as younger people are sort of finding again something that maybe they knew about, or finding for the first time something that's always been there, that we have an opportunity to build something deep on that nostalgia.
Sure.
And, so there are these elements of the Black church, whether it's the congregational singing, whether it's the organizing, right? Whether it's, people know, as you noted much earlier, that the Black church in Mississippi still has some weight.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't believe it, they wouldn't come to us at election time.
Right.
or when various things are happening, they come and say, Reverend Buckley, we need to have a meeting with you about some legislative agenda issue that's happening. So there are people out there who know that. I think the problem for many of us is that I don't think we oftentimes see ourselves as giants as opposed to grasshoppers. We're so busy saying what we don't have and how bad things are that we don't wait a minute. We still have value and relevancy. We have to refresh it. We've got to do some new things with it, but don't throw it away.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are any number of ways and reasons that you see a tipping of the hat from the new generation to the old generation. Cassette tapes are coming back, believe it or not, right?
Wow.
You've got these young college kids who are buying cassette tapes now, right? Yeah, right. And so there is that sort of acknowledgement, or even if it's not an acknowledgement, it's just like you said, the nostalgia of. And I think when you apply that to the Black church, that there is always there is that, whether it's the sound of that B3 organ, or
Mhm,
whether it's
mhm.
the peppermint, or the fans, but whatever it
Yes,
is,
yes, yes.
it speaks to our souls.
Yeah,
And all that some people are waiting for is for it to now speak to our minds and speak to our issues, because it's always speaking to our souls.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So, in the last few minutes we have left, what are some of those kind of soul work things that you think? Let's do a little bit of a forecast for the state convention, if you will. What do you imagine being like 3 areas that churches, convention should be looking toward in terms of speaking to those soul longings? What's going on in Mississippi that the church needs to be responding to with greater efficacy?
Wow. So, wow. There are a plethora of just issues we could name, particularly as it relates to, uh, I guess, the more recent legislative agendas. But let me try and, I guess, be a little broad and maybe work it toward the granular. I think the church has to lean into addressing issues of structural racism where they
Mm,
exist. Um, I was looking recently at a map of the state, because, as we're sort of planning out our work regionally, and
yeah.
and thinking through, what are the counties that need to have more of our presence and all of that. So I'm always looking at state maps, and something jumped out at me recently that I knew, but it hit me in a different way. I was looking at the interstate system, looking at 55, and um, and just started thinking about east of 55, west of 55, um, and and not just in Jackson, but throughout the state,
Wow. Yeah.
right? Throughout the state. If you look at our colleges and universities, east of 55
Mm, mm,
versus west of 55, right? And when people start making arguments and saying structural racism doesn't exist, yeah, here's a great example right here, right? Where you have a structure of an interstate, and development on one side and underdevelopment on the other. Ole Miss and Mississippi State on the east, Jackson State and Valley State on the west, and Alcorn on the west, right? That that not being, just by chance, right? But there being a dividing line, there being the appropriations there by the legislature, the locations, and then that continues to have generational impact. When developers come, where do they develop? Where do they locate? Where do they build? They build where there's already allocation and appropriation of funds. They build where there's already infrastructure. And so, though 55 didn't create it, 55 delineated it. It
mm.
it it created and so everybody knows. And so I think we have to, as a convention, I'm trying, I'm kind of talking around, but as a convention, we have to be aware of those types of things and see and call out structural systemic racism where it exists, and show the real life applications of it, and then be willing to address it, because that has real life implications for people day to day, right?
Yeah.
That has
Yeah.
implications for how communities are built, for how housing is built, for how those houses have access to then resources. Why does a Ole Miss not have issues with internet, but Alcorn does, right?
Right.
The
Right.
east and the west side. So
Mm-hmm.
we gotta have those conversations. And
Yeah.
and a convention, in my mind, is in a position to make those arguments, to highlight those arguments, to make sure that those disparities are clearly articulated and stay before the public, and that this new generation thinks about it in that way. You know, when our college kids are thinking about going to schools and they're looking at, well, I like this school because they got this. Well, let's think about why that
Yeah.
school has that, right? And it's not just a mismanagement of funds, or that we don't know how to do this. No, there are systems that have been in place for generations that have caused those disparities to exist. So
Yeah.
I guess I guess for me that's one of the big things that I think a convention can help to advance those conversations and make sure that future legislative sessions and agendas are crafted in such a way that it addresses those inequities. Yeah.
No, I think that's brilliant. And we'll close basically how we began, talking about that the convention can do together what a local church may not be able to alone. We can, in many ways, grow large memberships and have, great charitable contributions and whatnot. And those things are nothing to shy away from or to besmirch. If you want to make a compelling case to the state legislature or to any other group, at the end of the day, it may sound very secular, very worldly. You need numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to say, we represent 400 churches collaboratively representing 10,000 people, and we're saying this, and this is wrong, right? You need the NACP to say we represent these many branches, and because they need to be able to look at that and say, wait, a lot of people are concerned about this. They've done their homework, and ultimately, when you start making those kinds of adjustments, or moving toward dealing with those kinds of things, you really do begin to speak to those other issues. If we want to, have churches with people who have sustainable incomes and live in good homes and all, you got to be able to speak. There's a way in which the stuff that we fuss about in terms of, what goes on Sunday is often really directed back to some policy decisions somebody made 50 years ago, right? When I drive down to Alcorn daily, and you see just all of the impact of economies, local economies, it's not by happenstance that part of the state is like that. I mean, it's not just, those poor people don't. There are histories, there are inequities, there are structural realities, and we have to, as the church, as the convention, not have prophetic laryngitis. We've got to be able to, with weary throats, tell the truth in a compelling way. And I'll say this, and I think what I love about what you're doing is not just shouting about the problems, preaching about the problems, touch a neighbor 3 times about the problems, or saying, let's do the homework. Let's document. Let's have data to support something that hopefully will get the attention of decision makers and leaders around the state and the nation.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I'm grateful that you are a part of that work. That you're part of the team to help us make those cases, to help us articulate our agenda, and to get it in the right ears and hearts of those policymakers. We're relying on a great team of individuals who are part of the church, but who are also part of institutions like the NAACP, and these, in my estimation, certainly drive down parallel roads. And we're glad to be a partner.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I hope you've been blessed by it. Those of you who've been watching, I hope and pray that you've been able to see something and hear something today that's been a blessing to you. And we continue to pray for and support the Mississippi Conference of the NAACP. This has been CJ Rhodes, pastor of Mount Helm Baptist Church, and in addition, third vice president of the General Missionary Baptist State Convention, and Reginald Buckley, president of the state convention, as well as pastor of Cade Chapel Baptist Church. God bless you.
Bless you.